So we're very pleased and excited to have this opportunity to change the way that mothers have been viewed, mothers and welfare have been viewed as moochers and scroungers, or as charity, but to really establish this is what we're entitled to because of this valuable work that we do, without which society could not survive. So that we hope that at this conference, people will help us and join in on this campaign. And we're looking for groups to endorse our petition. We have copies here. You can also there's a petition online. We want to get as many individual signatures as we can, and to people to press their congressional representatives to sign on to the bill if they haven't, and as well as help us find a new primary sponsor for the Work Act. So we hope that people will join us in building this, which we think is a very exciting campaign.
Right, thank you, Pat.
Can you share the online petition
Yeah,
for those watching?
You mean what
it's
website?
on Go Petition. Who has the website? You can go to the Every Mother is a Working Mother Network,
Okay.
and it's a Go Petition. And we encourage everybody to, even if you've signed the print, the print copy, please go online to Every Mother is a Working Mother Network, to the Go Petition is listed on there, and sign online, because it's also very good to have as many signatures online. And also, if you're a member of an organization, please endorse. Pat has created a list, and perhaps in the discussion we'll have some time, but we know that Pax Christi, their national organization, just signed on, and increasing numbers are signing on as well. Before the next speaker, I just also quickly want to say that in the UK, Salma and the others, they've also introduced a bill, working on getting a bill introduced in Parliament that directly demands a payment for caregivers, not only people on welfare, but for caregivers, because in the UK, they're chipping away at the welfare state, but some of it is still there, so you can still get welfare. And on top of that, any mother, should be able to get a living wage as well. The reason in the US we are focused on the RISE Act is that it's a big piece of power to have an actual bill in Congress, right? But we know that there's a connection with the rights of the poorest, the most impoverished caregivers, and all of the rest of us, and the connection with poverty and the mass incarceration and criminalization of entire communities. And on that note,
Margaret, just one thing. The website is everymothernetwork.net.
Okay, thank you.
But what had happened is when they came in and took the kids from me, it was no neglect, none of that. I went to court after they took the kids, and in court they lied on me. I've been trying to get standards in court, and I still haven't got it. And I hadn't had no lawyer at the time or nothing. Now I do have a lawyer. I did get in the Superior Court, but now I'm working my way to the Supreme Court. DHS lied so much. They told me they was in favor of giving me my nieces back, but yet I haven't got it. Now they put it in the child advocacy. They say it's in the best interest of the children. What's the best interest of these children? None, because as far as I know, my nieces don't want to be where they at, and they 3 and 4 right now. They just had a birthday, and they don't want to be, and they know they don't want to be where they at. So they say the kids are being traumatized. Yeah, they're traumatizing all kids. They traumatize these kids and then put them on medication. They supply all the medications for these kids. They supply, it's just like, okay, if a child don't want to go into the system, they making them. The ones that wants to go in the system, they don't even want to be bothered with these. Because these the ones that want to be in there, they know they can't medicate them. They got good sense. The ones that don't want to be in there, they wants to medicate them because they angry, they mad, and they don't want to be where they at. And DHS is manipulating a lot of young women out here. I've been to the center where I go visit my niece 1 hour twice a month. And I have to sit down and talking to mothers that's in there with 4 and 5 kids. They're targeted women with a bunch of children. And one woman was in there, she said her aunt called DHS on her because her toilet was backed up. Instead of fixing the toilet, they took all her kids. Then there was another one, she was living with her aunt. She was living in one bedroom with 4 kids. So they told her she couldn't stay there. So they took her kids from her. And now they're visiting their kids at these centers, and it don't make no sense how they doing. They used to have you where you could bring food for the kids. You know, sit down and eat a meal with your kids. They stopped all of that. You can't even get them a bottle of milk, the babies a bottle of milk, stuff like that there. You know what I'm saying? Kids like they milk and food. And it's just horrible the way they're doing, you know. And then they, like me, I'm a low income. Right now they say, oh, don't get the kids back to her. She's in a low income house. Right now they with a family member who's got their own house. Oh, now it's better. They are in a better place because they got money. I didn't consider myself as poor. I had food in my house. You understand? They had their own room and everything because they look for you kids that had their own room and everything. But it's really horrible the way they are taking these kids for no reason at all. They're supposed to help you. Now, in my situation, whatever I needed, they were supposed to help me with. They didn't do no such thing. They went in the courtroom talking about I ain't had no toys for the kids. I had plenty of toys. You understand? I had that. It's just that right now I'm fighting to get in the court to get standards. They won't let me in. They said in there they lied. They said I was being evicted. They said I had mental issues, financial problems. I don't see none of that nowhere about. I have proof of all of it, but they won't let me in this courtroom. And then they just took another niece from me in August the 16th. And it was a shame. I had to cry because I had to leave her in DHS. Leave her there, and I'm certified foster parent. I had to leave her there with strangers. Now the 2 that has my niece, they didn't want to take her, so I haven't even seen her. They telling me I can't see her. She's being put up for adoption. But this time I know some of my rights. I went in and filed a petition so that I could intervene on anything that's going on with her. And I'm still fighting for all 3 of them. Now my sister had another baby just 3 months. Not even 3 months, she only wore 3 pounds. So I'm trying to do something for that one too. But DHS is targeting a lot of people with children. And these children ain't even together. It's 6 kids, they're not together. You got 2 with this foster home, 2 with that foster home, 2 with that. Then when it's visiting time, one parent might not even show up with the other kids. So they only get to see 4 kids to get to come. And it just don't make no sense. It don't make no sense at all. What are they doing to these kids? Traumatizing. I had a nephew. They medicated him. He's 13 years old. They medicated him so much he didn't know when he had to go to the bathroom. You understand? They were giving him stuff for diarrhea. Then they gave him stuff for constipation. Then he looked again. He didn't know when he was swollen on himself. And they just traumatizing these kids and stuff, and then tell you they got mental issues. No, they the ones with the mental issues. Like my pastor told me, they're the ones with mental issues. Anytime they think they can take a family member from another from the family and just sit behind their desk, you know, it's crazy.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. Just the tip of the iceberg of what we've seen these families going through, and we're also getting information in Los Angeles County, even out of one of the supervisor's office, of children who are being sexually abused in some of these homes. And remember that coach up in Pennsylvania. That's really the tip of the iceberg, because when you think of what's going on and where are these children coming from, right, that they're using in these films and everything else, and we really have to take another look. Alrighty, next we'd like to welcome Monica Peabody. She is with Power, an activist, welfare rights organizer based in Olympia, Washington. Monica.
We have been organizing for welfare rights for a long time. In 1984, we started as the Welfare Rights Organizing Coalition, ROC. You might remember that if you've been around a while. And then in 2007, we reorganized into Power, where we are now. We're an organization of low-income parents and allies who are fighting for a strong social safety net, but our long-term vision is a world in which children and caregivers are truly valued and the devastation of poverty has been eradicated. And that's a good mission, huh? So to do that work, we have a multi-pronged approach. We feel like we're an organization of low-income people for the most part. So we don't have a lot of money to throw at the issue, but what we do have is our stories, and our stories are valuable, as Carolyn just exemplified. And we're seldom asked about what policies should be created to help our families out of poverty, and yet we're the ones who know what works and what doesn't work. So we are up in there as much as we can, telling our stories, telling, doing our best to be heard, being effective at being heard. So we meet to share our stories, to build our stories, to be effective in telling our stories, and to figure out how to broadcast that as far as and wide as we can. We feel like a big part of, we're here at this Tear Down the Walls conference, and a big part of tearing down those walls is getting rid of those divides that have been created from the beginning of this country. I mean, well, I'm a mother, but at least I'm not a welfare mother. Well, I'm a welfare mother, but at least I'm not an immigrant. We constantly break this down so that we're standing on top of somebody who's a little worse off than us to feel a little bit better and maybe reach towards that middle class, or, And there's this myth that we can all make it, but we all know that's a myth. So a big part of our education is helping people understand the face of poverty, who's poor and why, and to break down some of those divides and to build some bridges across the movement so that we aren't fighting against each other, but that we're recognizing oppression from where it comes. And welfare reform, and Pat did a great job of breaking that down. It created, so I was a welfare mom. My daughter was born in 1990. And that was AFDC, that was pre-welfare reform. If you were a parent and your income went below a certain level, there was a benefit that was available for you. It wasn't a lot. You didn't get a lot of respect going into that office and asking for it, or from the larger community. Once you were a welfare mom, everybody knew, had a certain set of definitions about you, that may or may not have anything to do with who you were. But it was there. It allowed me, once I became a single mother, within a few months of my daughter being born, and I looked for work, and there was no way to juggle that, caring for that baby, affording childcare. And I wanted to be your mom. This was my one chance. I wasn't planning on having more kids, and I wasn't going to get this chance again. So I went to the welfare office. I got my $440 a month and my $200 in food stamps. Well, guess what? The welfare wage for a single mom in Washington State is today. Any guesses?
$280.
No. Those of you that I want the no, it's $385. So in 1990, my welfare income was $440 a month. Today it's $385. My daughter's 23 years old. So things have changed. Rents have gone up. So it is not a living wage. It's not even close to a living wage. And part of the way that we can tear down the walls is the way that we look at economic policies in this country and in this world. Because welfare reform is structural adjustment. It's the same thing we're going into third world countries and we're doing. We're destabilizing the economy. We are decreasing social services, and we're creating a desperate workforce of mothers who will do pretty much anything to feed their kids, and we're doing that on the backs of these children. We're increasing childhood poverty for corporate interests in this country, and it is shameful and it is wrong.
So I want to talk today about how poverty and militarism both need the caregiving labor to be devalued. And in order to do that, I want to talk a little bit about my own experience. So I was born in Mexico and I was brought to the U.S. as a young child. By the time I was 15, my family had been completely destabilized by poverty, and I was pregnant with my daughter, Corinne, who's in this room. There she is. I did what I could to survive. I moved out of a home that had become abusive, and I worked and I worked and I worked for the survival of my daughter and for my own survival. I was young and I believed in the American dream, and I was able to manage for a while, and then the American reality set in and poverty pushed me into the military. Where else could I find socialized healthcare, socialized housing, and socialized pay? I signed my life away to the U.S. Army from 2004 to 2008. From the beginning of my indoctrination, the military made it clear that I was a commodity. The drill sergeants repeatedly told me that I was now the property of U.S. Army. What I found in the Army was a culture that was dominated by racism and misogyny and upheld by capitalism. Cadences about how napalm sticks to kids and how much fun it is to massacre Haji children were commonplace. And all of us were repeatedly told that if we didn't man up and, excuse the vernacular, stop acting like pussies, we were going to fail. And we were taught to dehumanize, and we were dehumanized in the process. Poverty, produced by the basic denial of the value of the labor of reproduction and caring labor, forced me into a position where the empire could use me as a tool of destruction. The degradation of life that our permanent war culture perpetuates is an expression of our collective denial of the value of our labor. The resources that wars are fought for are considered so precious that the lives of our children are considered disposable, as long as they die for oil, for minerals, for water, or for just plain political dominance. The imperialist U.S. system creates poverty here to feed the war machine with soldiers. These resources that should belong to the people in order to help raise the next generation are instead providing the military with more weapons and more machinery to expand their globalized designs. The civilian casualties of war embody the devaluing of human life. War highlights the divisions between power and powerlessness in a brutal way. Women's labor is extinguished not only when the lives of their children are extinguished, but also when their reproductive rights are taken through the use of toxic chemicals in warfare. From Agent Orange to depleted uranium, women's rights to give birth and raise children are being stolen. One of the biggest propaganda campaigns that I encountered in the military is the myth that our troops are overseas in order to liberate women. Dropping bombs on women is not liberating.
That's right.
Dropping depleted uranium in communities is not liberating. The cities of Basra and Fallujah in Iraq that received the brunt of our bombardment campaign are now witnessing dramatic rates of cancers and infertility. In Basra, hospitals estimate that 80% of the children born will die within the first year of life from gross deformations. As the women of Iraq and Afghanistan try to make sense of their new reality and struggle for survival, the women of the U.S. must do the same. We must work together to recognize with dignity the caring labor we have been doing for time immemorial. And we must recognize this labor and stop the systematic destruction of life that is war. Like we heard from Selma James earlier, we must use our relative privilege in order to make sure that we're investing in caring, not killing.
And I don't know if there's anybody that really knows more about the impact of the privatization of welfare than people like Pat Gowans in Wisconsin, because that's where the experiment of workfare first happened in this country, going under the radar. People were not paying attention to it, but Pat Gowans was. Pat
Right.
Gowans.
Yeah, Bill Clinton passed basically the Work First program, TANF. They call it Work First, and it's basically to destroy the workforce, not to mention destroy mothers and children. So the way privatization works is, of course, privatization means you prey on the poor for profit. Preying on the poor has always been the reality of, all of the worlds, whether the working people, whether the mamas, whether the disabled. But the welfare system was now going to be privatized, so the person who would give you the welfare check was going to be a private corporation, the Goodwill, the YWCA, Maximus. It became a privatization, so multinational corporations travel across the world buying welfare contracts because it's easy money. Who's easier to prey on than a mother with no lawyers, no money, no bombs, no defense? And remember, the mothers were already very unpopular simply because they were having to go to the government for money from the man instead of one individual man. So being privatized this way, the Goodwill, for instance, got an $87 million contract. They were our head child welfare department in Milwaukee, the Work First. The reason I'm saying it destroys the workforce, Bill Clinton and Hillary said the work program would require mothers in every state to work mandatory 30 hours unwaged work and job search. So what does this do to the workforce? You now have 5 million women who are taken out of college, can no longer go to college, can no longer stay home and take care of your babies or read to your children. You have to go into the workforce and try and find work. Most of the moms ended up in temporary work immediately to avoid working for no pay for 30 hours. But a third of the women can never, ever get into the workforce because there's not enough jobs and there's too many health problems, too many children problems. And so those women have to be working in the public schools, the Head Starts, the meal programs, the nonprofits, the NGOs. Anyone who wants a mom to work for no pay has her now in the United States. So what happened under privatization in Wisconsin, the roles, we were paying for the AFDC for 80,000 moms, we were paying 570 million. The rolls went down from 80,000 to 8,000 in a year.
My God.
80, and our poverty went up to 548,000 below poverty. 500,000 below poverty, but only 8,000 can get a check now. Mm-hmm. And that check comes with mandatory work it off. And no minimum wage, no benefits, no social security credits, no unemployment, nothing. And this is what privatization. So the Goodwill, we ended up getting the Goodwill out of business because they could not tolerate our protests. We kept saying how they prey on the poor, they kill the disabled, they destroy families, they rob from families. They couldn't get their donations for their stores worldwide, which it makes them a billionaire corporation, multi-billionaire. Maximus moved all the way to Israel. They bought up a contract in Israel. Israel took on and named it the Wisconsin Plan. And 30 hours mandatory work for all the poor in various towns in Israel. We worked with the Nazareth group. This is the only group in the world who has managed to, after 5 years, they managed to close down the Wisconsin Plan in Israel. It was primarily Arabs who are the poor people in Israel, and both husbands and wife had to do the 30 hours of unwaged work activities in the Work First program. So this is how lucrative privatization. When you think of privatization, because people say, oh, government's bad. The government may be prejudiced, okay? And so it was very hard being on welfare. You will all agree AFDC is tough because of the prejudice of the people in the community and the government. But when you combine prejudice with greed, what do you have? You have a slave system. Prejudice and greed is what funnels the most deadly, dangerous slave-type systems and preying on the poor. So at the head manifestation of this preying on the poor are the children now being taken away from their mothers. The child welfare CPS system is also being privatized. In Wisconsin, there's as many as, well, we have this building here on the front of our newspaper, I hope you all got it. A $12 million building was just built by a private corporation to house all the 200 state corporations and workers. And then there's 3 more buildings that are housing 250 workers and administrators. This is all to take the children, and it's all privatized. Guess who our head private agency now, taking after the state takes the children? The Children's Hospital Adoption Agency is the one who now provides all the keeping the children away, making them go through mandatory services, etc. Children's Hospitals, St. Emilian's, La Causa, we have all private corporations now, and then they subcontract with 169 private corporations who are therapists and lawyers and doctors and psychologists. We have layers, thousands of professionals. It is a job creation program for professionals and a child trafficking program for the suburbanites, the hungry, baby-hungry suburbanites, the white suburbanites, both straight and gay, are literally going into the ghettos to get babies from the hospital. And up until age 4 at least, those children are being trafficked to the suburbs immediately. And they're paid, they get free babies, they go and say, I'll do foster care as long as I can adopt this child. And so they take them the ones who are taken from the hospital are accused of mental illness, whether they have it or not, and regardless, it's not abuse or neglect. Even if you are ill, it's not abuse or neglect. And those are the reasons that in most of the states that we deal with, they take the babies from the hospital. The older children, they're taken a lot now because a guy hit mom. And so they don't get the guy out, they don't put him in jail. In fact, they'll even give him the kids if he's in the mood. They take the children away from the mother because she exposed. And they write research saying that 20 years from now, those children will become murderers or suiciders or rapists or teen pregnant. That's in there with the murders. Wow. These studies, this is not abuse and neglect. Abuse and neglect in all the states is defined as serious harm to the physical health of the child, whether by abuse or neglect. None of these laws are imposed. It's not a criminal court. They're denying the women any type of legal defense. It's a complete violation of all constitutional due process rights. We need lawyers to sue. No movement can survive if we're not fighting in the streets, which we are. We're in the streets. And if you're not fighting in the legislatures, which a lot of us are, petitions, whatnot, you also have to be in the courts. And our movements are weak at this point. In the welfare rights movement, when the moms were running that back in the 70s, they had lawyers to sue. We need lawyers to sue to get these children back home, to make them stop taking them in the first place. We've gotten Gowen more to introduce a bill also, another bill besides the RISE bill. This is called Enhancing Parental Representation. It's to allocate $15 million to train lawyers to represent moms in these child welfare cases. Studies show moms would get their kids back within 6 months versus 2 years if they had legal representation. And that's another bill that's, wending its way through the legislature. So we need lawyers, we need to help get the word out to get people to understand really, truly. Everyone says, oh no, but they're drug and alcoholics, sorry. They're drug and alcoholics and they need their kids taken. And that's not really true. The kids who are in danger, who need to be taken, are usually missed. Mm-hmm. They are routinely taking children for no reason. And I'll just end by mentioning, you talked about drugging the children. In this issue of our newspaper, we talk about a woman named Marianne Godbolo. Have any of you heard of her? She's in Michigan.
Yep.
Well, she is the hero now of the resistance to the child welfare movement. Last year, the social workers told her she couldn't take her 13-year-old daughter off a Risperdal. And she took her up because she was having a lot of problems with it and she didn't want her on it. A drug, for kids. And this is her, Marianne Galbolo. When Marianne took her daughter off of Risperdal, the social service system of the CPS told her, a social worker, mind you, said, you have to put her back on Risperdal or we're taking your child. And, she was like, well, drop dead. So the woman went and she got a court order, rubber stamped by a judge, which is what they do in all of our cases in Milwaukee, are always rubber stamped. No judge ever really sees it. And so the police came to her home and said, we have to remove your daughter. We have a warrant here from the CPS court. And she said, no, get out. She's my daughter. I'll do what I want with her. So the police left and they got tools. They came back to take her door off the hinges. They didn't kick in her door. I guess in Michigan they're kinder police or something. Anyhow, they didn't kick in the door. And instead they started taking it off. So she got a gun and she shot in the ceiling, just like Marissa Alexander. You all know Marissa Alexander, I hope. And so she shot to defend her child from CPS. For 10 hours she held up. The police were afraid of her after that. So they got over 100 police, including in the air, on foot, on cars, you name it, all the rifles and all of that. And she held them off for 10 hours. And for those 10 hours she was negotiating with a judge who said, they won't take your daughter, they wouldn't do that. So after 10 hours she finally agreed with this judge negotiator. Then she opened the door and let them come in. They took her daughter, put her in an institution, put her back on Risperdal, gave her vaccinations, sexually assaulted her, or beat her, one or the other. And mom was charged with 8 criminal charges. She beat them all.
Yes, she did.
And you know why she beat them all? The judge looked at it and he said, well, this wasn't legal, that wasn't legal. The CPS worker, everything she did was illegal. This wasn't a legal warrant. There was no danger to the child for emergency detention. And a parent has a right to decide if they drug their kids, not the state. So she had a t-shirt made up. People all around the area in Michigan and some of the other states were doing vigils for her and whatnot. So this is an important legal decision in the courts too, because they ruled that everything happening in that CPS court was illegal. And it was, and she did get her daughter got back to Auntie at least in the first 3 months and then finally back home. And it took her about 6 months before she got reunited. And like I said, beat all the charges. So what a hero, huh? Isn't that something?
Thank you. Thank you. Sam Weinstein.
Thank you, Margaret. I wanted to start by concretizing a couple of the things we've been talking about with a couple of, to me, somewhat unbelievable facts. The top 400 wealthiest people in the United States are worth $2 trillion. And you can compare that with the national debt, which is approximately $16 trillion. So 1/8 of the national debt is in their possession. And it might be interesting to you to know that there were 61 billionaires that didn't make that list. And, you know, we've been complaining about the 1%, but those 400 people constitute 0.00001 of the population. Not the 1%, but the 100,000th of the 1%. Which goes back to the point that Selma was making, that there's a heck of a lot of money around. It's just that some few people have all of it, right? And I wanted to make one other point in relation to the fact, or well, two other points in relation to the facts. One is that the cost of TANF, which we've been talking about, of what is given to welfare mothers to help raise their kids, is approximately between $17 and $19 billion a year. Compared to the military budget, which is just under, at this point, just under $1 trillion, which means that the relative amount of money that is put into killing people as compared to the amount that is put into caring for people is 50 to 1. Which to me is an unbelievable figure, and I'll end with this piece with one last fact, which is that men's income, and I'm just talking here about men's income has dropped over the 40 years between 1969 and 2009 by 28%. Now, like I said, that's just men, and you know that what's happened to women's wages and to people of color is always much worse than that, right? And we must start there. Now, before welfare reform or U.S. structural adjustment, I think that's really a good way of phrasing it, right? Before that happened, I did a study of the track of welfare welfare payments and the track of the minimum wage, and I found that they generally dovetailed fairly well. That is, when the minimum wage went up, when it was as a result usually of an increase in welfare. And that, when you think about it, makes perfect sense. Welfare has always been the floor behind wages, underneath wages. If the only way they can drive people out into really shitty jobs, as opposed to taking care of their kids, right, is by driving down welfare so that they can get you to take those jobs for no money, which are really disgusting, right? Now, part of what welfare reform did was to continue that on one level, but on another level to break that relationship. And what we had as a result is no increase after that structural adjustment. What we had was no increase in the minimum wage for more than 10 years.
That's what I forgot to say.
So, and you know, in the labor movement, which as Margaret said is where I've spent the last 30-something years of my life, right, we all know as a commonplace, if you don't move the minimum wage up, then everybody else on the wage structure is hurt. It is the driving force. But what hasn't been nearly as clear is that the driving force, in fact, was not the minimum wage, but welfare itself. Right? So you have to look at those things. Now, I want to bring in, you know, I thought I was the only one that was looking at it that way, but when I was doing some other research, I found that a particular study had been done in Michigan, and it had to do with general assistance. Most of us have forgotten this because it disappeared so many years ago now, but there used to be something called general assistance, where you didn't have to have kids to get some money from the state. They cut that in preparation for cutting welfare. They did away with that. And there was one study which shows that in the state of Michigan, they in fact cut general assistance, which by the way had a majority of men on it, right? It was the one thing that men could get, and it had a majority of men on it. They cut general assistance, and on one day in Michigan, 80,000 people lost all their benefits, right? And somebody used that as the basis for a study of what happened to wages in Michigan. And what they found out was that in general, wages fell by 4%, and for women, wages fell by 6%. Now that's a very tight relationship. And maybe 4% and 6% don't sound like a lot, but when you're making very little, 4% and 6% is the difference between whether you have heating in the winter or not. Right? These are concrete things, and I noticed, by the way, that the Republicans now have a bill, because people have been able to, in this recession, people have been able to get food stamps, the SNAP program, and they have moved into that in a big way as the only kind of money they can get in some fashion, right? And the Republicans are now introducing a bill to cut that. It got cut, by the way, last Friday automatically, right? Yesterday, it got cut automatically under the sequestration. And there are something like 47 million people in the United States who are now on food stamps in one form or another, right? But the Republicans want to cut it more because they've seen too many people are getting something. And that bill and the Republican bill is now being called the starvation bill, right? Which is what it deserves to be, because we really have to look that this is what is happening to people. Now, I want to make a couple of other points briefly. It wasn't, when they cut welfare and they created workfare, not only did they, in the end, cut wages, but they also cut the whole structure on which the labor movement is based. And the unions have done very little about it, because that is what workfare amounts to. You have people with no protections. They're getting money, they're getting less than the minimum wage. They don't have overtime rates. There are a whole series of things which we have built in the labor movement, which we built this whole structure to protect workers, and what we have in fact is a two-tier system where we have a whole set of workers that don't have those protections. And you know, you really have to ask, what was the labor movement doing? What was Nero doing while Rome burned, right? And we have seen, I mean, it's a commonplace all over the place that the labor movement is in terrible trouble. And they talk about, you know, well, they're working with their allies and so on. And I take Margaret's point this morning about allies. You're in real trouble if that's what you're looking at it as allies, because the labor movement then dumps their allies left, right, and center, right? And it's really unfortunate that that's the case, because they didn't see welfare as being critical, as being at the very basis of what they have been trying to do and of raising wages. But I do want to note, it's not because they didn't know. And I do want to note, somebody from ASME saying, when you flood the labor market with workfare recipients, you see enormous wage depression from the bottom third of the workforce. That's intentional. They know. They know exactly what's happening. But it's not what they have made a fight about, and as a result, they're in a whole world of hurt. And the other part about it, I do want to make a point about men. Like I said, general assistance got cut. We have seen over the years more and more men taking responsibility for their families, becoming carers. And you would have hoped that in this society, part of what we want to do is to encourage that to happen. The exact opposite is what is being done, right? And part of what we've been talking about, which you went into so well, about the poverty draft. You described it for yourself, and it's true for women, but it has been even more true for men. We have been turning our young people into killers, not sharers, and we seem to be doing that intentionally. And I hope we can all get together that one of the tearing down the walls is that wall as well. Thank you.
Thank you.